My wife and I spent the night in a cabin, but something strange happened. Part 1. Written by Flimsy Counter 4497. The trip was a surprise anniversary present from my wife. The holidays had been busy, so we figured what better way to start the new year than in a cabin in the West Virginia woods. My wife had found the place online. It was a newly renovated property right at the edge of a wildlife sanctuary, somewhere that we could go to get away from the hustle of DC. A recent storm had just blown through the mid-Atlantic, so snow still blanketed the ground. Out here in the sticks, the back roads had yet to be plowed, so I carefully maneuvered our vehicle down the gravel paths. "Wow, it's beautiful," I said to my wife as I pulled up the cabin's narrow driveway. Trees surrounded the property, branches and trunks glistening with ice. "I told you," she said gleefully. "It looks even better in person." The house sat at the top of a small hill so that it overlooked the wintry landscape surrounding it. Large windows adorned one side, and an expansive patio wrapped around the structure. It was raised off the ground, an impressive set of wood steps leading up to the front door. "It even has a fenced-in yard," my wife said, "so that Willow can play in the snow." Willow, our 3-year-old labradoodle, adored the snow, and a fenced-in yard meant that she could be outside without me or my wife freezing in the winter weather. "It's perfect," I said as I put the car in park. I leaned over the center console and kissed my wife. "Thanks so much for a wonderful present. It's gonna be a great weekend." It only took a few minutes to bring our things inside. The interior of the home was just as beautiful as the exterior. Plush rugs dotted the solid wood flooring, and modern light fixtures hung from the ceiling. The cabin was small, but it was enough for the 3 of us. The main bedroom branched off to the right of the entryway, which lit up automatically when we stepped through the door. To the left stood the rest of the home. It was an open concept, with the dining room and kitchen flowing into the living room with a door to the backyard. I set our bags down in the foyer and walked through the home, taking in the rustic yet contemporary design. My wife followed close behind, Willow's leash in hand. I crossed through the living room and opened the curtains to get a look at the backyard. I heard a jingle behind me, and suddenly Willow was at my legs, already eager to get outside. I laughed, then I unlocked the back door. Willow bolted outside, but didn't immediately go down the stairs. At first, I thought she was just hesitant of the snow-covered steps. I urged her to go down, but I realized she wasn't staring at the steps. She was staring at something lower. I couldn't see from my angle, so I poked my head out the door to see what it was. But there was nothing there. It was just the steps at the side of the house. "Go on," I prompted Willow, but she wouldn't move. She just kept staring at the side of the house. Impatient in the cold, I nudged her back legs until she eventually ran down the steps. "I took the bags into the bedroom," my wife called from the kitchen. "You should go check it out. The bed's enormous and the view is great." I told her to keep an eye on Willow and then headed towards the bedroom. The king bed faced a set of double windows, which provided an almost uninterrupted view of the forest beyond. A small shed stood to the left of the window, only a few feet from the main house. Because the house was raised, I could just make out the top of the shed. I was about to turn around and head back into the kitchen when something caught my eye. A thin layer of snow covered the shed's roof, and near the edge, right next to a tree, looked like a small set of footprints. "Isn't it great?" my wife said, her sudden appearance making me jump. She stood in the doorway, the light from the entryway casting a long shadow into the bedroom. "It is," I said. "These woods are amazing." My wife smiled and then walked to my side. "Did you see those tracks?" I asked, pointing to the top of the shed. She squinted and then nodded. "Oh yeah," she said. "Maybe it's a squirrel or something that lives in the tree." "You think that it's a squirrel?" I asked. "It looks too big to be a squirrel." She shrugged and then rested her head on my chest. Maybe a raccoon then." I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. A raccoon was closer in size, but the tracks still looked too big. "Should we go and check on Willow?" my wife asked after a few minutes. You go ahead," I said. "I'm going to unpack in here." She nodded and then left the bedroom. Grabbing our bags, I wheeled them over to the dresser and closet and began unpacking. We were only here for a few days, but I hated living out of a suitcase. Crouched over, I unzipped the luggage and started pulling out our clothes. I was about to open the dresser drawer when I heard a whisper behind me. "What was that?" I asked, standing up and turning around to face the doorway. I expected to see my wife, but no one was there. The door frame was empty, just the wall of the entryway staring back at me. I stood frozen in my spot, slowly looking around the room. I pressed the clothes against my chest as if they could somehow protect me. I waited to hear the whispering again, but nothing came. Just the wind outside and the creaks of the house. Slowly, I opened the dresser drawer and I placed the stack of clothes into it. I bent over to pull out more clothes when I heard the whispering again. This time I snapped around, bringing myself to my full height. But once again, the small hallway was empty. I was certain that I had heard a voice though, and not my wife's. It had been high and raspy, like the person's throat was raw. I remained frozen for what felt like an eternity, but I didn't hear anything else. Unsettled, I quickly made my way back to the living room. Rounding the corner, I saw my wife standing at the window with her back to me. "Hey, were you talking to me just now?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She turned around to face me. "No," she said. "I was just watching Willow." Did you have the radio on or something?" She looked at me quizzically and then shook her head. "No, everything all right?" I bit the inside of my lip and then nodded my head, a tad too aggressively. "I just thought that I heard something," I said, making my way across the room. I rested my head on her shoulder, then looked out at Willow. We let her play outside for another few minutes before calling her back in. Like before, once she was at the bottom of the stairs, she stared at the side of the house instead of coming up. My wife had to call her 3 times before she eventually came up. We spent the rest of the evening playing games, eating dinner, and watching TV. Close to midnight, we decided to go to bed. After getting ready, we crawled under the blankets and my wife pulled up a show on her phone. Within a few minutes, I felt myself drifting off to sleep. The next thing that I knew, a soft thud woke me up. A jolt of panic ripped through me before I realized that it was just Willow jumping down from the bed. Throwing off the covers, I followed Willow to the bedroom door. The entryway light bled in from underneath the door, so I closed my eyes before walking out. Blindly, I shuffled towards the back door, Willow right behind. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, Willow began to growl lightly at my feet. She peeked her head through the bottom of the curtain and was peering outside, staring at the darkened yard. Goosebumps crawled across my arms, and I slowly lifted my hand from the doorknob to the light switch. I squinted to see outside, but I wasn't wearing my glasses and I couldn't make out much. I scanned the yard but could only see the soft outline of trees and the small scattering of chairs that surrounded a fireplace in the back corner. Willow let out another growl before releasing a clipped bark. She almost never barked at home, and it was only ever at people. My heart thumped against my chest as I pressed my face right up to the pane of glass in the door. With a flick of my wrist, I turned the porch lamp. Bright light instantly flooded the yard, and I scanned for any motion, any sign that someone was there. Nothing moved, and I almost let myself relax. Then I saw it, and my blood ran cold. There, in the backyard, something sat atop one of the chairs. The trees cast long shadows over that part of the yard, but something was definitely there. A solid mass atop the chair furthest from the house. It looked to be about 3 feet tall, but without my glasses, I couldn't make out any more details. Cursing, I ran back to the bedroom. The sudden commotion set Willow into a barking fit as my feet slammed across the floor. In just a few seconds, I had made it to our room and I was scrambling for my glasses on the nightstand. My hands met cool metal and I grabbed the glasses as I ran back towards the window. Jamming the glasses onto my face, I nearly slammed into the door as I peered through the pane again. Immediately, my eyes found the chair. There, resting atop it, was a thick piece of firewood. I stared at it as if my attention would suddenly reveal what it had been. Had that firewood been there all day? Had I seen it when I'd let Willow out before? I was ripped from my thoughts by my wife's stumbling out of our room, shouting my name and asking what was going on. I told her what had happened, that Willow had woken me up to go outside and that she had started to growl, that I had seen something or someone in the chair, and that I had run to our room to get my glasses. She peered out of the window before letting out a sigh and telling me it was just a piece of wood. I agreed with her and apologized for having woken her up. Something was off about the scene, but I couldn't figure out what. So we let Willow out and watched her together, me keeping a close eye on the area around the fireplace. After a minute or so, she came back inside and all 3 of us went back to bed. For the next few hours, I still couldn't sleep. Something still bothered me. I tried to shut off my brain, but it kept working at some unseen problem that was just below the surface. I was just about to drift off when I realized what had been bothering me. There hadn't been any snow on top of the firewood. All of the other chairs had an inch or so of snow dusting their tops, but the firewood had been absolutely clean, which meant that it couldn't have been there when the snow had been falling just a day earlier. Either the log had been placed on the chair that day when we got to the cabin, or someone had been sitting there and had used the log as a replacement when I had run to grab my glasses. A few moments later, a second realization hit me. When I had gotten out of bed to take Willow outside, the light in the entryway had been on. Neither of us had stepped into the foyer yet, which meant someone else had triggered the light. Someone else had been outside of our bedroom door. The realization made my stomach drop. Someone had been in the house. Someone maybe was still in the house. I resisted the urge to shake my wife awake, instead thinking through what to do next. I laid in bed, my eyes open and staring at the ceiling. I tried to think of any other explanation, but there were simply too many things that weren't adding up. My thoughts continued to spin when suddenly the light in the entryway clicked on. I laid frozen in bed, not daring to move a muscle. Then, from the foyer, a long shadow slipped into the room. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. They stood there for what felt like ages, and I didn't dare move. Even though my heartbeat was thudding in my ears, I heard the quiet noise of the doorknob being turned ever so slowly. However, after a few moments, the handle stuck. I'd at least had the foresight to lock the bedroom door. The person on the other side tried a little more forcefully to open the door, but they weren't able to make it budge. A few seconds passed, and then I heard the doorknob be released and the shadow slipped away. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. We weren't out of this by a long shot, but at least the person hadn't been able to get into the bedroom. I decided to give them a few minutes to leave, and then I would wake up my wife, call the police, and drive to the nearest hotel. I was just about to roll over and nudge my wife awake when another shadow entered the room. This time, though, the entryway light didn't click on. It took me a moment to realize where the shadow was coming from, and then I realized there was a full moon tonight, and the shadow was coming from the window. Without being able to stop myself and having more courage since I knew the person was outside, I bolted up from the bed. My eyes went straight for the shed. I knew that's where the culprit would be. I had expected to see a man staring in through the glass, a burglar trying to assess his target, but what I saw melted my bones. A small figure crouched on top of the shed, a clawed hand grasping the tree for balance. Even at its full height, the creature could not have been more than 3 feet tall. Its flesh was gray and emaciated, as if it hadn't eaten or seen the sun in years. Beady red eyes sat sunken in its bony skull, and a row of sharp fangs glinted in the moonlight. Upon seeing me rise, it released a wretched screech, like the sound of an animal caught in a snare. Instantly, I knew what it was doing, screaming a warning that it had been seen. As if on cue, a loud thumping noise burst from inside the closet, the sound of fist slamming against a barricade. Our luggage. After unloading our things, I had placed the bag on the floor of the closet. Whatever creature was outside must have a counterpart trying to get through some sort of passageway in the closet floor. As if egging its comrade on, the monster outside slammed its fists against the glass and began to shriek even louder. By now, Willow was awake and barking, and my wife was upright, her eyes wide with fear. With no time to explain, I picked up Willow and I grabbed my wife's hand, pulling both of them from the bed. I only let go of her hand to grab the keys on the nightstand. Then we rushed into the entryway and out the front door. Clawed feet scrambled across the patio behind us, but I didn't turn back. Instead, I clicked the car unlocked, and fully awake now, my wife grabbed Willow from my arms before ripping open the passenger door and throwing herself inside. I dashed around the side of the car and jumped inside, my wife having already opened my door. I slammed it shut with one hand while I plunged the key into the ignition and started the car. Something heavy slammed against the back window, and I glanced in the mirror to see a pair of red eyes slide out of view. I threw the car into drive and I peeled away from the house. It wasn't until we were near the end of the driveway that I risked another glance back. The front door of the house was wide open, but other than that, everything seemed normal. Then, I noticed something in the yard. The side of the house had a small door in it that was hanging open. A door right at the foot of the stairs. Depending on the ground under the home, it was possible the door led to a crawl space a few feet tall. A crawl space that spanned the entire length of the house. We drove until we reached the nearest police station. It was early Saturday morning, but we talked to the officers on duty. I told them what I had seen, but they seemed doubtful. However, they said that they would check it out and asked if we wanted to go back with them. I told them hell no. My wife and I stayed in a nearby hotel that night, and the police called us a few hours later. When they said that nothing was out of the ordinary besides the door that we'd left open, I asked them to check the crawl space. They said they already had and confirmed that it did indeed go underneath the entire house. Other than a few animal skeletons, though, there wasn't anything under there. They said that I had just likely seen a raccoon or some other animal outside, and that I had probably just dreamed of the person at the bedroom door. They said that they've gotten quite a few similar reports from other city folk vacationing in the area, and that it was likely just our imagination since we weren't used to the woods. When I asked about the passage into the closet, they also confirmed that it was there. They agreed that it was strange that the house had a direct entry point from the crawlspace into the main bedroom, but it wasn't big enough for an adult to get through. Maybe a child, but not a full-grown man or woman. Once the sun was fully up and with a police escort, my wife and I returned to the cabin to get our belongings. She still wasn't sure what had happened, but she believed me that someone had tried to break in. After we collected our stuff, I walked through the house for one final check. Certain we hadn't left anything in the main bedroom, I went to close the door when I noticed small scratch marks on the handle. Looking more closely, I noticed that someone, or something, had broken the lock. I shut the door and suddenly realized how dark it was in the foyer. Looking up, I saw that the bulb in the light had been removed. I told the police about it, and they said that they'd check it out. But I could tell that they didn't believe me. There wasn't much else my wife and I could do. So we loaded up the car and started our drive back to DC. It wasn't until about an hour or two into the drive that I noticed a smudge on the back window. A smear of red blood. I clicked on the rear windshield wipers and held the button down until the smudge was gone. Then, we drove the remaining hour back to the city, putting the entire trip behind us now.